Johnston, welcome.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Well, I guess it's going great for everyone who's probably watching this. This is our Canucks This Week video. It's brought to you by the fine folks Paragon Roofing BC. Visit them at paragonroofingbc.ca. Best roofers in Vancouver. Really quick turnaround. Complete consultations. Give you a free quote. Just go to their website. Shingle Master Certified Roofers. They are the best because I'll tell you what, Patrick, this time of year, you do not want to get the doors blown off you. You don't want to get the roof blown off you. The San Jose Sharks may want to look up Paragon Roofers because what the hell happened in San Jose? Explain it to me.
Yeah, talk about when it rains, it's pouring in San Jose. I mean, you're looking at a team, and it's hard not to talk about this game without talking just about how bad the Sharks are. I mean, the Canucks were fantastic. They scored 10 goals, right? Some of that, of course, is probably about luck.
That only happens in the preseason.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, talk about looking at a preseason game in the regular season. The Sharks have no depth. I joked a little bit after the game that said free Kyle Burroughs. Kyle Burroughs is an all-time good dude who was the Canucks' seventh defenseman and is essentially the number one defenseman in San Jose right now. And that, if there's one thing to tell you about the state of that team, it's that right there. Thomas Hertl, obviously their highest paid player, kind of the last standing of the old era. He has no one to play with. Logan Couture has been out hurt. Not clear when he's going to be back. It's a big mess, and it's a team that I think has belatedly accepted the rebuild, but have gone through it in such a bizarre manner. Like they kind of backed into it, kind of were forced into it, and now you look at the stands and the frustration of the fan level, the frustration of fans. I mean, we can talk about frustrated fans in Vancouver, disappointed fans in Vancouver. They haven't been selling out, but they're still putting bums in the seats to a degree that they're not in San Jose. I mean, crowds were down 10% last year. They were down, 20% even sort of year over year last year. Some of that was the pandemic, but a lot of it is that I was talking to someone who knows that team very well. A lot of it is that you're not getting fans coming down from San Francisco. That's part of the reason why the game starts at 7:30, because they're allowing time for people to commute down from the city. But also, just there's no buzz. It's a team that's got nothing going for it. So the Canucks struck in a way that you want a team like them to do. We have been seeing enough of this. We talked about this last week. You need to start seeing this as being a team that just presses on. I mean, they beat St. Louis last Friday. And in a way, like, they really dug in there, right? They didn't just win. They made that win with impact. They had a good performance while they were tired against a Stanley Cup contender in New York. They've been a strong, solid team. They won on Tuesday in impressive fashion over Nashville. They're doing things really well, obviously. And then I touched on this on my Canucks numbers story, which is already up. There's a lot of luck in this, right? Like, they're playing well, but they're getting a lot of bounces. They're going to lose some of the bounces, but they've done enough to say that, they're going to lose some games. But at this point, you're not going to see I don't think you're going to see the kind of collapse that we saw too often last year, where they were just holding things together with Scotch tape. This is a team that's better built than that.
So it's an interesting point you make there about the fans in San Jose. Clearly the Canucks, based on their last 7-8 years, have not been a good draw. Even if we know we've lived through bad teams here in various sports, even with the Grizzlies. It used to be, obviously the Bulls, the Lakers, the Rockets, any team that would come to town, people would want to go see them. I think the Canucks around 2011, the Sedins were still a draw for people who really liked hockey. A Canadian team always tough in the NHL, but obviously there's this trauma associated with the Canucks, and I saw that exhibited a little bit from the behavior of fans saying, "Oh, this is a trap game. This is a trap game. This is a trap game." Before you know it, like, it's 10-0. So I did want to ask you, what is the difference with this team? Like, when you look at what's really working for them, like, is this the coach? Is this the guy they've been looking for? Because when we look at this team that, like, if we take the last two sample sizes, okay, Green's thing fell apart and they brought in Boudreau, and then they had this great finish to the season. You thought, okay, they'll carry that over. They didn't. Then they bring in Taka. They have this great finish to the season. You think, oh, this is going to happen again. No, it didn't. Like, this team is on point. Why?
I mean, I touched on this a bit last week, but you go look at Rick Tocchet and this, you know, the way he sort of drilled his teams, and the sort of the concepts he instills in his players, in what he wants them to do every time they're on the ice, and the way they're seeing the game. He clearly works on how he wants them to see the game, and the way they're seeing the game matters in a way, and it's been effective in a way that I think, especially Travis Green. Bruce Boudreau was very much an open the door, get out there, play kind of guy. The game, I think, honestly, had ended up passing him by. He's a good motivator, not a superb tactician. And I think he did miss Brad Shaw. Brad Shaw had been such an influence, I think, defensively and on the penalty kill the season before. Didn't really have a replacement for that. Mike Yeo is not that guy. The overall sort of strategic approach just wasn't there. Travis Green, I think, was trying to figure that out. I'm not sure he ever really quite. I don't think he ever had. Never had a defense core that was like this. He never had a Philip Hronek, for instance. I think that's a big part. Sorry, you look at Ian Cole. I mean, Ian Cole's still, I think, finding his way a little bit as a Canuck, but there's a guy that plays with smarts and plays with a consistency and has a sort of a backstory that delivers. Whereas, for Green, he was dealing with.
Jay Beagle supposed to be that?
Well, that was literally who I was going to mention. Where Jay Beagle, you could, that they held him up as being this guy who'd won, blah blah blah. But like, come on, Jay Beagle was a good centerman who, by the time he arrived here, he wasn't up to speed. He couldn't do it, and there were misfires. There's a sort of wanting players to be things that they said they were versus what they actually were. And I would say that the roster construction here is a big story. And you're looking at a guy like, I mean, Green barely got to play. Conor Garland isn't scoring, and Conor Garland may yet get traded, but Conor Garland is doing everything right? Like that's a depth forward that they have who is an effective player every time he's on the ice. Pius Suter finally scored last night, but another example of a guy that, even if he's still finding his way, and I think still has to develop his offensive game here in Vancouver, they aren't getting overrun defensively. Think about how often they gave up odd man rushes last year or the year before. That's just not happening. Think about the cross slot pass, like the most dangerous pass in hockey for a goalie to deal with. They're just not happening this season. And I think a lot of that is about understanding stuff like what talks about in terms of their neutral zone defending, that he wants his forwards moving forward. He doesn't want them backing up. He wants them taking away the space. He wants them understanding how to force the other team to go into spaces when they're carrying the puck up the ice that they don't want to go to, and that you can create pressure. You can force them into making decisions, and then have some confidence you can stand them up at the blue line. And in the modern game, as fast as it is, those aren't easy things to do. And, Travis Green in the end struggled to get his team coordinated in that sense. Bruce Boudreau didn't have that at all, I think, last year. And Tocchet's found that. And as I said, as I wrote a little bit on the weekend, Tocchet's teams in Arizona were very well drilled. They had a really strong sense of the two-way game. The numbers back this up. He just never had any talent. Conor Garland, I asked him about this on the weekend, and he said, man, this team's better than those ones. Like, they had Phil Kessel was the best player on their team. They had a couple of young forwards. Garland was one. Nick Schmaltz was he's a very good center now, but he was a young player. They had half a season Taylor Hall, but really there was no scoring talent on those teams. This team has scoring talent. Now, are they, they're finishing at a higher rate than they're ever going to carry on with, but there's a reason why they're scoring the way they're scoring. And it's because the players like Elias Pettersson is not going to keep scoring on a quarter of his shots, but he is going to keep scoring, right? Like, he is legitimately now in the Art Ross race. JT Miller's in top 5 for scoring. Quinn Hughes is the best scoring defenseman in the NHL. All three of those things aren't going to carry on quite like that, but they're still going to keep scoring, and that's the good news for Canucks fans. So,
I think part of the tragedy for fans, certainly for the owners in the last couple of years, is they were never in the race. Like, the momentum was gone from these horrendous starts to the season. You do build momentum. I know there, especially in the last couple of years, there are exceptions to this trope that the U.S. Thanksgiving that's kind of what you are. I mean, of course, the teams bracketing the last playoff spot, there's going to be movement up and down, but the St. Louis Stanley Cup season aside, we kind of know the good teams around that period. So I mean, right now the Canucks would have to lose 5 games in a row to even just get to 500. And I know I always ask you at the end of these videos, about the next week. But when I look at the Canucks lineup, and I know that they don't actually hand out banners at U.S. Thanksgiving, although I wouldn't put it past some marketing genius to come up with that. But I look at the schedule here. They've got, Dallas at home. Then they go on this little mini Canadian run where they've got the Oilers, Senators, Leafs, Habs, the return of Bo Horvat, and the Islanders, a Calgary team, which looks god-awful, a Seattle team, which is struggling, San Jose again, the Avalanche, and then when you hit U.S. Thanksgiving, they got back-to-backs at home, or no, I guess they're on the road, Seattle and San Jose again, followed by the Ducks. And then they finish out November with the Golden Knights, who are another story. But I look at this team now, Patrick, rather than just reading the schedule, I look at this team, which has the 5th best record in the whole NHL. And you just wrote about this. This is their best start to a season in what, 18 years?
18 years.
18 years. I look at this month of November, and I'm not counting chickens, but as you look at building momentum, this could be a historic month for the Vancouver Canucks.
Yeah.
So we talk about blowing the roof off again, thanks to our friends at Paragon Roofing who sponsored the video. What's the ceiling for this team?
Well,
are they legit? Could you see this team competing for a Stanley Cup, or is it still just about getting in the playoffs?
I mean, I look at the roster, and they're now at a point where there's a lot of things to like, obviously, in their top 6. Like Elias Pettersson is playing fantastic. That line is flying. The second line with JT Miller, Brock Boeser is playing. He's back to playing the best hockey of his life. Phil DiGiuseppe is one of those stories where you're like, I don't understand why it took this long for someone to really buy in. I mean, 3 training camps in a row, he's been a story here, right? Like the first one he showed up, Travis Green was still here, and he was kind of the talk of the camp as being this really interesting sort of depth pickup. And then he didn't play for the Canucks the whole season, despite the fact that Travis Green was really high on him. They wanted to find a way to get him back up. Bruce Boudreau comes in. DiGiuseppe is called up because of the COVID. You remember the Omicron crisis? Remember that, like, they had all these games delayed around the Christmas of 2021? Like, it was wild. And then DiGiuseppe was one of the guys who got stuck in the U.S. because the Canucks, in this sequence, because they let go of the guys who knew how to talk to Canadian immigration, like, they didn't understand how to get guys across the border. And so they end up with these guys stuck in hotels and all these things. DiGiuseppe was one of those guys. Like, it was wild. And Boudreau wanted to play him, and then the opportunity never came. And then finally last year, he gets in the lineup, and he becomes a player, and becomes a guy that Rick Tocchet comes to love. And now he's finally playing, and we can see why. I mean, he is one of the best forecheckers we've seen in Vancouver in quite some time. He knows how to turn pucks. He's found exactly the right line. So, I mean, I suppose in theory you want to find an upgrade over him, but that line's flying, and I think that line's well assembled. They're doing things well. They are being the two-way line that JT Miller, I think himself, has always wanted to talk about and wanted to be. They're playing in a way that's so effective. So, okay, you're always looking at players that push players down the lineup. So sure, you find someone who's better than Giuseppe, second line winger, you can push them down to the third line, on and on and on. But you start looking at, okay, how do we make our third line better? How do we make our fourth line better? Well, if you find a new third line winger, you can push one of those guys down to the fourth line. Do you really want Conor Garland and Anthony Beauvillier, guys with contracts that start with a 4, on your fourth line? I don't think so. I think you start trying to see if you can change things around and be more efficient. Can you find defensemen? I mean, that's the other thing to me. Someone was asked, I've just finished up the mailbag before we spoke here. The question about Ethan Bear, what's his status? Well, I mean, I checked in with his agent, Jason Davidson, and said basically, is he recovering as expected? He said yes, which is essentially, Bear will be ready in December. But as it stands, the Canucks would only be able to offer him a league minimum contract. They don't have any cap space to bring him in. So unless they're able to make a different move one of those forwards, somehow find a way to move Tyler Myers, who we know they've tried to trade before, there's not going to be any space to add Bear. I mean, Bear, either he'll take that contract here because he really wants to be here. I think there's every reason to think that another team would come along and be interested in signing him and can probably offer him more money. So does he want to join a team that looks like it's anybody? I mean, imagine Ian Cole, Ethan Bear, second pairing. Like, that's a pretty enticing prospect. Can this team be a Stanley Cup contender? I mean, if Elias Pettersson really is this rocket to the moon that he is right now, and Quinn Hughes really is, close behind, that does change the dynamic of the conversation, and you can start to understand why they're saying, okay, this is the year to push the chips in, because will Pettersson want? I mean, if they win the Stanley Cup, I'm sure Pettersson probably will think differently. But does Pettersson want to stay no matter what? Are they able to manage their way around that growing cap hit that they've imposed on themselves by buying out Oliver Ekman-Larsson? It's not a straight direct line from where this team is at, which looks like it's a team that's going to make the playoffs, to a team that has enough depth, enough power, enough sort of overall things going for it to be a team that can win 1, 2, 3 rounds. That's what you're starting to talk about. And can you survive all that? And do you have all the bits and pieces around the edges? Filip Hronek has been a great story here. He is a heck of a defenseman. He is being a great partner for Quinn Hughes, but is he the right partner going forward, or do you want him in the second pair?
But it's funny to hear you talk in these terms, Patrick, because we've been used to hearing people grind their teeth over the Canucks salary cap situation for the last 7 years. Like, it's actually it's so negligent on ownership's part that they stubbornly stuck with the plan for so long and did so much damage, because I look at where this team is now, and still that's a complete, despite those constraints, I look at where this team is. There are ways around it that they can look to add a piece like Bear, I think, if they need to. You'd already mentioned Garland, but I look at this Vancouver Canucks team and I think, Hronek is a great story, because this time last year people were kicking garbage cans because you gave up a first round pick. That you got to give it. You have to give plaudits to management and say, like, okay, maybe this happened faster than most fans realize, but I honestly look at this team now and I go, when I look at that month of November, like, this team could still be in the top 5, like, heading into the Christmas period. And I don't think that's a fluke. If we always knew that, Miller had his abilities. Yes, there's issues around his mood. We saw that this week. And obviously Hughes and Pettersson are elite players, but it's the other pieces. They're no longer the drawbacks. And I just, to me, I'm heartened by how excited people are with this. So yeah, you know what? I don't think we're going to do the old thing, which we still get tarred and feathered for at the province, of showing a crystal ball with Naslund holding the cup up, and we get blamed for that. But I will say, I don't think this is a fluke. And I look at their schedule, and I think that this could be a vastly different season than people were expecting coming in. Let me ask you this last before we get into the schedule. Where do you think this team is mentally in terms of being able to handle this? Because you do hear this a lot, in particular in hockey. You have to learn how to win. You have to know how to handle the success and be ready for the grind of the playoffs, which they're not steeled for at all. It'd be jumping in the deep end to go on a long playoff run here. But where do you see the leadership and the mentality ingredients in this team?
I think there is enough desire. And it is that old thing, the coach, you have to believe in your coach, right? And the best way to believe in your coach is to get results. And they've been getting results. They can see immediately that all the stuff that Tucker was talking to them about last year, and that they did get some results from last year, was not a mirage, at least in the early going. And if they carry on with all the, as Rick Tucker likes to call them, all the staples that he keeps hammering home about, if they keep that up, they're going to keep finding success. They know they're going to hit bumps in the road, right? Like, they know they know they're going to lose games they don't deserve to lose. They know they're going to have stinkers that they do deserve to lose. You talk about how fortunate they felt the other night in Nashville, a game I mentioned earlier. They actually got the win. It wasn't a game necessarily that Rick Tocchet was terribly happy with. Obviously, benching JT Miller was a huge story, but they can bounce back from that. Like, that was a moment in the past, and they pushed it aside. They've learned their lessons of how to play successfully, how to build everything successfully. It comes back to, like you said, can they just keep going? Can they keep going on? I think there's enough understanding of how badly, the false dawns they've had. I mean, this team's experienced false dawns in the past. They've had terrible starts in the past. I think they recognize that how much their bad starts last year hurt them in terms of, they missed the playoffs despite playing well at the end of the season. They know what that means. And you touched on it. They have a chance to set something up here, set up a playoff push that may not be that arduous. If they really do carry through for the next couple of weeks into American Thanksgiving, when, let's be clear, 75% of the teams in the playoffs at that point in the standings in a playoff position make the playoffs from there. They're in a great spot to put themselves in such a position, and they won't have to scramble the way they've had to scramble to try to make the playoffs. And you look, I mean, the last time they were in anything like this was 2019-20, and I think this team is better than that team. And that team 2019-20 was also struggling with a two-way game in a way this team is not struggling. And they're doing all those things, as we used to say, the little things right. They're doing those little things right. And they're really, you're absolutely right. They're totally setting themselves up for something special here if they keep this going.
Okay, we got to wrap it up there. 3 games before we shoot our next video. Dallas and Edmonton at home, and then they start, of course, that your traditional Eastern swing with a game next Thursday in Ottawa. How many of those do you think they win?
I'm going to be realistic. I think that Saturday against Dallas, I think will be very close. I think Dallas is going to win. They're a Stanley Cup contender. Like, this is a measuring stick game. Edmonton coming in, I have no idea what to think of Edmonton at this point. My instinct is that Edmonton should pose a bigger test than they did, but there's just something about the way things are going for the Oilers. I'm just, as much as Connor McDavid is, that forever enticing story. It's tough to say. Their goaltending hasn't been good enough. Their system is a disaster. I think the Canucks are just playing so much better. Their hockey is just so much more competent. I think the Canucks will take that one. I think the Canucks are going to win in Ottawa. Ottawa is obviously in a complete mess on and off the ice right now. I just think that's going to be. I think it's going to be a 2 out of 3 win week for your Vancouver Canucks.
Well, you're the expert. I'm not. I'm just a lunkhead. I think they win all 3. And
okay,
I'll have to get you to look something up in terms of the Canucks' most wins in a month. I think they win 11 games this month. I really do, looking ahead of the schedule. And I think that's going to, I don't
here.
I don't, obviously the Golden Knights are class apart as
San Jose again. Yeah. They got a couple
San Jose,
in Seattle.
San Jose twice.
Yeah.
Calgary, that's where I say this.
Yeah, there's a lot of reeling teams in there. Yeah, 11 would be a big call because they play 15 games this month. Like 11's a big call, but 9 or 10 wins certainly is totally on the table.
I would have them losing to the Leafs, the Avalanche, and the Golden Knights. Other than that, and that would be, like you talk about setting the table heading into December. You'd clearly, you'd be in the conversation. Anyway, going to leave it there. Great stuff, Patrick. It's so refreshing to be able to talk about things other than what we've been talking about for 7 years, like, this broken loop. So thank you to Paragon Roofing. Go to Paragon Roofing BC. You always get this last part, .ca, paragonroofingbc.ca. You can get a free estimate just by plugging in your details there. But this is fun. It's a fun year. It's a nice change. And we are looking forward to see what you can bring us the rest of your way. Sign up for our Canucks Report. You get all Patrick's stuff delivered to you in your inbox. Also, Patrick does a weekly mailbag. Worked on it today, as he referenced. He will answer your questions. Go in his stories. Leave questions there. We're giving away Canucks tickets every month for the best comments. So go in, leave a comment. You could win Canucks tickets. Thanks, everyone. We will talk to you next week.